This episode is about the number 15 team on the Juggernaut Index, the Miami Dolphins. Without question, the Dolphins made the single greatest position upgrade in the NFL this offseason. In fact, this team made one of the greatest upgrades in the history of upgrades. Miami acquired Pro Bowl receiver Brandon Marshall via trade and then shipped Ted Ginn Jr. to San Francisco. That's a ridiculous improvement. Almost unfair, really. It's not quite like the Gary James to Barry Sanders, but it's close. Marshall has caught over 100 passes in 3 straight seasons. Ginn managed only 38 catches on 78 drops last year, and he specialized in cruel, game-changing drops. If you've forgotten how ugly it was, just check the tape. The Marshall addition clearly changes the defensive game plan against the Dolphins. This team managed to run the ball effectively last season with 139.4 yards per game and 22 touchdowns, even though opponents had little reason to respect the passing attack. Now, with an elite wideout on the field, Miami's offense presents an almost unsolvable problem, unless your team happens to employ Darrelle Revis. We've already seen Marshall transition successfully to a new system, from Shanahan to McDaniels, and a new quarterback, from Cutler to Orton. So there's no obvious reason to downgrade him on your draft board. No one seems willing to predict that Marshall's streak of triple-digit reception seasons will continue, not in Miami's run-heavy offense. But it's worth noting that the Dolphins actually closed the 2009 season by allowing QB Chad Henne to attempt 45-plus passes in 3 of their final 5 games. If they were willing to take to the air with Ginn and Devon Best as their primary receiving threats, then we shouldn't be concerned about Marshall's 2010 workload. He's reportedly been roasting Miami's young corners in camp, just like you'd expect. Henne, of course, becomes a more interesting fantasy commodity this year, now that he has a top-tier receiver at his disposal. He is the unrivaled starter at quarterback for the Dolphins. Chad Pennington and Tyler Thigpen are fighting for position further down on the depth chart. Henne has a terrific arm, an excellent offensive line, and he's surrounded by talent at the skill spots. He's an obvious candidate to make a value leap, and he's essentially a no-risk player at his current ADP of 130.9 at Mock Draft Central. The rest of Miami's receiver core is competent, though it's not loaded with fantasy options for gamers in standard leagues. Best is a sure-handed slot receiver who developed a nice rapport with his quarterback, but he's a non-factor inside the red zone. In PPR leagues, Best will have some utility. Elsewhere, he's not really in the roster discussion. Brian Hartline appears to have the early lead in the battle to start opposite Marshall. Greg Camarillo is still in the team picture too, as is tight end Anthony Fasano. Patrick Turner was a third-round pick in 2009, but he's just trying to remain on the roster. Again, Marshall will dominate the targets here. Everyone else is fighting for scraps. In case you haven't heard, the Dolphins' running game is pretty good. They have a multi-generational playbook. No, Marshall's arrival won't kill off the Wildcats. And a pair of excellent backs in Ronnie Brown and Ricky Williams. For what it's worth, those two are privately scheming to deliver twin 1,000-yard seasons. Brown suffered season-ending injuries in both 2007 with an ACL and 2009 in a Lisfranc. But he now refers to last year's trauma as a non-issue. If he can be believed, then he'll return a nice profit on his average draft position of 46.5. If Brown can't be believed, then we're looking at another huge year for Ricky Williams. Ricky outgained Brown on a per-carry basis last season, 4.7 to 4.4, and he emerged as an elite fantasy option in the second half. Between weeks 10 and 15, Williams averaged 99.8 yards per game and reached the end zone 6 times. He's on the wrong side of 30, sure, but we can probably all agree that Ricky has had a non-traditional career arc. Let's not write him off just yet. Even before Brown's injury last season, Williams was delivering useful fantasy tools on a limited workload, 7 TDs in between weeks 1 and 9. Just as Miami's offense benefited from Josh McDaniels' inability to play well with others, so too did the defense. Mike Nolan directed an impressive year-to-year defensive turnaround in Denver, but he and McDaniels later parted ways. It's a small sandbox in Denver, and Josh will not share toys. Nolan will lead the Dolphins D in 2010, and on paper, it's a more impressive unit than the one he inherited last year. In fantasy, Miami's defense was useful last year thanks to 44 sacks and 15 interceptions. The IDPs you'll want to own are DB Jeremiah Bell and linebacker Carlos Dansby with 114 tackles and 109 tackles respectively. If you have any questions or complaints about this post or about Yu's mustache, you're encouraged to express them in the comments. This is a caring community, gamer. Everyone's here to help. Except Fitzy. He's here to judge. But the rest of us are helpers.